What's up guys, I'm going to show you my next version of my desktop power supply using an old computer power supply unit, so let's go. Alright, so you might have seen one of my previous videos where I turned an old power supply from a computer into a desktop power supply. Now there was a few things that I wasn't 100% happy with on that power supply, and one of those being the fusing. So there was no fusing allowed for in the old power supply, and also the connections as well. Basically I had a few banana plug leads that you could plug into it, and that was about it. So what I'm going to do with this one is actually have a separate lead that'll run from the power supply unit into this separate box, and then from this box I'll break it out to many different connectors that will allow me to use a lot of different things on this one power supply. Now the first thing that I did was test this power supply with the power supply tester, so I've got another video on that you can have a look at, and that's to make sure that this power supply is working before I actually work on it, because the last thing I'd want is to do all the work on this power supply to find out that it's not actually functioning 100%. Alright, so what we're going to do is basically get rid of all the wires coming out of this power supply, and then we're going to replace it with one set of wires going into this box. So I've got a bunch of different components, which all up I spent about $70 on from Jaycar Electronics, which is just an electronics store here in Australia. Now you could purchase all the components on eBay. I didn't do that because I wanted to get them quick and I didn't want to wait for the shipping times from overseas. So, and what I'm going to do basically is have each of those components joined via one big cable into a plug which will go into the side of this box, and then you'll be able to plug that connector in, so you'll be able to move the two pieces around wherever you need to. And at any stage, if I find that the box isn't in the right place, I might be able to extend that cable to allow the box with the connectors to be accessible on my desktop, but the power supply tucked away somewhere else where I don't actually need to have it seen. There's a few ways to go about this. I could either, like in my previous video, do some work on the inside of the power supply and actually chop that up and add in some single wires which will run out to my actual box. Now just by looking at this, there's actually quite a fair few wires coming out of the power supply itself. Now these single wires that I have at the moment are rated at 10 amps or 15 amps. Now these existing wires on the power supply aren't going to be rated at that same current capacity. So what I'm going to do is open up this power supply just to see where all these cables are actually connected to, for starters. Now I guess this is where my disclaimer is going to have to come in again, and I'm going to have to say, if you're doing this yourself, make sure you know what you're doing, because we're fiddling around with the inside of a 240 volt power supply. So if you're not aware of what you're doing, just watch the video for entertainment purposes. But basically what I'm going to do is open this power supply up, and what I can see is there's quite a bit of dust on that. Alright, so there was quite a lot more dust on that than what I expected, but it's a good thing at least to clean the majority of it off. The dust is obviously going to shorten the lifespan of the power supply, but I'm not too fussed. I've got a fair few lying around, so if this one ends up carking it, I can always replace it with another. What I'm just checking on the inside here is all the different wires. Now they're all going to different places on the circuit board. The different 12 volt rails are actually marked differently. So there's the ones with the little line through it, which signify the second rail, and the first rail, which is going to the, including the motherboard one, is on that side. So that makes things a little bit easier for us. Now since I'm going to fuse most of these circuits at 10 amps because if I'm using anything over 10 amps, I'm going to have to rethink what I'm actually doing, because that's actually getting to some of the maximum current ratings of some of these cables. So what I'm happy to do is actually go with just the one side of these cables for the plugs that's going off. So I'm only going to use one rail. Since I don't want any of the cables on the first rail, I'm going to cut them off and actually screw them down into an actual connector so they're not actually shorting out on anything. And then what I'm going to do is take out the green wire that allows for the power supply to turn on, because I want to actually use that inside the box for a switch to actually activate the power supply and switch it on. So these are the ones we want to keep, and these are the ones I'm happy to cut off. And I'm going to cut them now. I can, once I've done all these, I'll cable tie them out of the way, but we just repeat for the other cables. Now that we've capped those off, what I'm going to do is just use some cable ties to actually tie them down, and that way we don't have to worry about any movement. There's still going to be plenty of airflow. Now that that's cable tied down, everything's nice and neat and out of the way. Now all we have to do, run the wires out to the box. So how am I going to do this? Basically, I'll run a bunch of the wires into this one terminal. Now this terminal looks like it'll only take about 4 of those wires, I'm assuming. Those 4 wires should give us at least 10 amps, and I'm going to fuse it at 10. So anything above that, I'm going to run a second set of these connectors, so I'll do that in the future if I need it. So what I'm going to do is work on 4 or maybe 5, and we'll go from there. Since the cables on this are already a set length, I'm just going to chop them on the end here, and we're just going to use them at that length. So basically now we've got 4 of those wires, which I will pull out to the same length, which they're all the same, which is good. So all I need to do now is strip those 4 wires back, and we can join them all. The first thing we'll need to do is get the wire strippers and strip them back. Now I'm going to twist these 4 pair together, and we're going to see. Use my pliers. Now I've got this 3mm wire here, and that's rated at 10 amps. So each of these wires, which are a little bit thinner. Alright, so I just had a bit of a moment there. With these cables, I just had a look on the actual cable itself. It says it's 18 gauge. So 18 gauge is good for roughly 7 amps. So what I technically could do is run 2 of them together, which would give us 14, or if I run the 3, it's going to at least ensure that we've got up to our required 18 amps on that rail. So you'll be expecting that roughly 21 amps. I'm gonna put a 10 amp fuse on it, so I'm happy that 3 of those wires should be enough. Tighten that right down. Now it's fitting nice this time. Alright, so if this was to go back on, you would slide that end on and screw the end up. I'm going to do the 3 black the 3 black wires, which will be our neutral. Same thing as before. Those tight as well. Alright, so we now have the 12 and the neutral. So what I'm going to do with the 5 volt and 3.3 is I'm actually only going to run one wire at the moment and fuse both of those at 5 amps. Now the reason I'm doing that is just because of the way the power supply is set up and the amount of cables that are actually tied off. I'd have to do a bit more work, and since I just want to get this going for the moment, and the majority of my components are actually 12 volt. Okay, so I've just realized I've made a bit of a error here. Nothing too bad. It was just the loom in between it, the loom around all the cables, so I'm going to just have to take these back out quickly. Now we have our connector, which will go into the end like that of the piece that'll be on the box. Alright, we're going to turn this on, and away she goes. So now that we've got one end done, next we can work on the box and all the little fuses and connectors all across the box. So that's next. I'm going to show you how what am I doing? Preview. Thanks for watching my video. If you liked it, hit that like button, or you can subscribe by hitting the button up here. Now I've also got a couple more videos up here on this side, and I've also got my cryptocurrency channel over here, so go check that out. But thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.